Hello and welcome to another edition of the Pacers Pride Podcast. I am your host, Cody Emerson, and alongside me, as always, my good friend and co-host, Dylan Deanhart. Dylan, I know first show of the new semester for us at least, but I know we needed a much-needed break. How was your break? And are you glad to be back, I guess? I don't know.
I'm glad that I'm back and I'm finishing up the last semester. I'm not glad that I have a full load of schedule of classes and stuff, but I kind of missed doing nothing over the Christmas break, but, you know, such is life, so
yeah,
back to
such is life of a college student, but I'm glad to be back, too, and just finishing out our last semester together, and it's going to be fun, and hopefully everything goes as planned, but we are really excited to announce we are joined by a very special guest. Pat Boylan of the Indiana Pacers is here with us. Pat, thank you so much for coming on.
No problem, guys. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so we're just going to dive into the thick of things and kind of pick your brain, I guess, Pat, if you don't mind. So Pacers, as they currently sit, are 31-15, second in the Central and third in the East still. So what has been your just overall thoughts on the season and how well the Pacers have performed so far?
Big picture, I've been really, really pleased. I don't think you can ask for anything better than where they stand right now at 31-15. And I know, especially as goes the way of Twitter, people will find flaws that they don't like in certain teams. I'm sure that was existing with the 73-9 Golden State Warriors. But big picture, this has been a really tremendous start for this group. Going into the year, I kind of thought last year's team, while it was such an unbelievable ride, maybe overachieved by a couple of games, and that they also really struggled without Victor Oladipo. So if you would have told me that this year's team would be without Oladipo for 11 games and really 12 because he played like 2 minutes of
the Hawks game,
where he went out and the fact that they've had 12 games essentially without him, the fact that there's 16 games over 500, a mark they never hit last year and a mark they haven't hit since 2013-2014, I've been thrilled with what they've been able to do. There are certain aspects, of course, that can use improvement. You'd like to see the record against some of the top teams a little better, but I also like to remind people that if you're 31-15, if the record against the top teams are a little bit better, it means you've dropped a couple of games that you shouldn't have dropped either. So I think big picture, if you would have told me that this team was 31-15, I would not have been stunned at the beginning of the year, but I would have guessed that it meant that Victor Oladipo took another big step forward and that they've had no injury issues, in which they have had injury issues, and if anything, Oladipo's numbers are maybe a half tick back of where they were last year. So I think all of those things bode really well from the aspect of you got the Pacers with more than double wins than losses, and Oladipo I still think has more that he's able to contribute as this season goes on. Yeah,
just it's been kind of a whirlwind type season, like you mentioned, with Vic missing basically 12 games, and then people in different facets have stepped up. I want to focus specifically on two people. First being Bojan Bogdanovic and the play he has shown this season, especially like you mentioned when Vic went down with that injury. He was basically the go-to scorer for this team. You've been inside the locker room and you've been able to talk with his teammates and Bojan himself. What have you seen in his play specifically that's made him elevate his play this year?
I think he looks a lot more confident and a lot more comfortable, and he's coming off a year that was pretty good. He averaged 14 points per game last year and shot at over 40% from the three-point line, which both of those things for a player of his caliber, I think you would have definitely taken a repeat of those numbers this year. That said, he seems a lot more comfortable in his role. He seems a lot more confident in that role. And the thing I really like about him is he's shown an increased ability to put the ball on the floor and score. I think when so many people think of Bojan, they think of his ability to shoot, which first and foremost is what he does well. 43% from the three-point line is terrific. If he can finish there, that'll be a great spot for him at the end of the season. But that's not all that he does. It's far from it, in fact. He takes about 4.5 shots from the three-point line per game, and he takes almost 12 shots overall per game. So that tells you about 2 out of every 3 shots he's taking are inside the perimeter. And that's so vital to his game, because when you have to respect his ability to put the ball on the floor, it opens up space for him to do what he does best, which is shoot. So it's been a terrific season for him so far. I think he's maybe taken the biggest step forward of anyone, maybe Domantas Sabonis as well. But what he was able to bring when Oladipo was out, I think, was vital. And I think in today's NBA, the ability for a player to do what Boylan pretty regularly does is so important. And I think him doing it at the level that he's doing it, I think you could put him right near the top of the list for why this team's been as successful as it has.
Yeah, it's just been, for me, I know when we first brought him in, it was kind of questionable, I know, for me, because I really hadn't followed his career that much, and I thought it was maybe a questionable signing, but he's most definitely proved that he's worth the signing, and he's played huge roles for this team, like you mentioned. You also mentioned the play of Domantas Sabonis, who currently is averaging around 15 and 10 right now, could be the leading man for Sixth Man of the Year so far. I've seen some different articles that have said he could get it, guys like Lou Williams, and others are obviously up for discussion as well, but the play of Domantas Sabonis has also been a key part of what this Pacers have been able to do this year.
Yeah, especially in November, and then here for a good chunk of January. You know, Miles Turner, I think, carried that torch really well in December. But he's taken, I think, a pretty significant step forward. His ability to finish around the rim has really jumped up, and he's not only so efficient, but he's such a good rebounder that I think his ability to do those two things, especially on a Pacers team where you say, how many really good rebounders do they have? And there's probably not as many as other teams have, yet the Pacers rebound just fine. And that's in large part because of what Sabonis does during his time on the floor. And really the only unfortunate aspect of him and Miles Turner is just they've done a pretty decent job when they both share the floor, but big picture, at least so far, they're not going to play huge minutes together. And I think both of these guys are worthy of more minutes than they play, but you need both of them on the floor as much as you can, and you can only, for a good chunk of the game, use one or the other. So that's kind of the prevailing storyline to me as we go forward here is if Sabonis and Turner continue to play well, how does Nate McMillan manage that? How does he manage their minutes? How does he manage who closes out games? Because, you know, frankly, I'm sure he would tell you he would like, a player like Domantas Sabonis closing out every game, and he would like a player like Miles Turner closing out every game. But if you play an opponent who plays, a stretch 4 and a stretch 5, you really don't feel comfortable with that on the defensive end for extended periods. And so that's one of the bigger challenges I think Nate has, is not only managing those two guys' personalities, and look, they're both very willing to whatever role they get, so that makes it a little bit easier on him, but making that decision, who takes that last 6-minute rotation, and I think he's called that right more than wrong this season, but it continues to be something that he has to manage every single game.
Yeah, what are your overall thoughts on, with playing both of those guys on the floor at the same time, or just who should really be in that situation late game?
I think that they've done a nice job together on the floor, but personally I'm not convinced yet that they could play, 15, 20 minutes a game together, and that's just because really to me there's no issue on the offensive end. You have Turner who can pick and pop, you have Sabonis who can pick and roll. And I think they actually fit pretty well in the offensive end. And they actually have been all right on the defensive end. They've been better than I think most would have expected. But still, if you've got a team that's playing a stretch 4 that can knock down that 3 pretty regularly, do you want Sabonis chasing him around the 3-point line, or do you want Turner? And if you don't want Sabonis, then you're taking Turner out of his natural position underneath the rim where he's such a good rim protector, and neither of those situations seem totally ideal. I think how this team is made up right now, I think that it's being handled perfectly. I think Turner is getting the starting nod, which is, I think, correct. I think they're getting Sabonis big minutes, which I think is correct. And I think Nate is viewing that end-of-game situation by team. I think if you have a lead, that you're probably going with Miles Turner because he's better on the defensive end and especially at the rim. Ultimately, I think when both guys are at their best, if you were to ask me to give a nod to somebody, I might give the nod to Miles, just because I think rim protection is such an important aspect of this league right now. Everybody wants to dunk it or throw in a three-pointer. And not only does rim protection help the layups and the dunks, but it also allows your perimeter defenders to stay closer on their men and to guard them with a little bit more aggressiveness, because you're less worried about getting beat because you have Turner there. But that said, it's interesting because their skill sets are so contrasting. The things that Miles do well and the things that DeMontis does well are pretty different from each other, and you absolutely can use a guy who comes in and does the things that Domantas Sabonis does. It's a really tough problem. It's a good problem to have, but it's really a tough decision, because both of these guys, I think the coaches would be the first to tell you, are worthy of playing more minutes if they didn't have the other guy in the lineup. So it's great that you have that luxury, but it still presents a challenge on who to play at what time, and to make sure you're managing, both of their personalities and that they're not getting too down with their role, which I mentioned earlier. This would be a problem for a lot of guys. It's not a problem because of the selflessness of a Miles Turner and a Domantas Sabonis. A lot of teams, something like this could have the potential to kind of break them apart. Look what's happening, and Dallas has had a fantastic season, all things considered. But look what's happening with Dennis Smith Jr. and with Luka Doncic over there. Is you have Dennis Smith, who's a really nice young prospect, and you have Luka Doncic, who's a fantastic young prospect. And Smith has, I think, only recently rejoined the team. He was so frustrated with his minutes and with his role. And that's nothing against Dennis Smith Jr. I don't know the guy, but those kind of problems do not exist here. And part of the reason why this team obviously is so good is its chemistry. And these two guys not having issue with not playing in that final stretch of minutes, I think it goes a long way as to why this team is achieving the type of things that it is.
Yeah, one last player I want to get your thoughts on is, you mentioned Pacers Twitter and social media early on when we first started talking. I think one of the most controversial, topics out there on Pacers Twitter is, I've seen so many tweets and stuff say, try and trade Tyreke Evans, blah, 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 and just people overreacting to kind of Tyreek's up and down season, would put it in perspective, What have you seen specifically from Tyreke, and your thoughts on... We've seen him struggle sometimes, but when he's on, he's a very dangerous player.
Yeah, and he's been pretty much on here for the last 12 games, and I don't know, how much that has to do with his PRP treatment or not. But for those who are unaware, when the team was in Brooklyn, he missed that game and went up to New York City and got platelet-rich plasma treatment, which essentially takes the blood in the plasma of a healthy area of your body, and it injects it into an area that's having some issue. And for that was his knee. It was a treatment that he got done before the season in Memphis last year, and he's coming off his best year of his career in Memphis, and he thought that had fixed the issue, and so he did not have the same procedure done before this season. It turns out that was not the case, and since he's had that treatment, he's averaging about 14 points per game. He's shooting it really well from the field and the perimeter. So that's a really positive sign, because as I would do radio interviews and podcast interviews throughout the year, I would say, look, this team is doing what it is, and it's not getting anywhere near the contribution it had hoped for from Tyreke Evans. And that is a big key, in my opinion, to unlocking their ceiling. And we've seen a lot more of what I think many of us expected in these last 12 games from Tyreke Evans. That said, big picture, he's got to put these performances together, I think, to continue to get this type of playing time, because there would be stretches where he was really, really struggling. And the problem with when a player like him struggles is his style of play is very one-on-one and pick and roll based, and there's not a lot of ball movement with it. So when he's playing that way and the ball stops a little bit more and he's not effective in that style, it's kind of a double whammy. And I think there's also no doubt that you've seen him play better in the games that the team has forced turnovers. He's really a weapon in transition. On 3 and 2s, he slows down. He's got that ability to kind of have that crossover and get to the rim with ease and easy lay-ins. And that to me is the key. You don't mind losing the ball movement with Tyreke when he's effective in the way that he is right now. But when it becomes a problem is when he gets to the rim, draws the double, can't get rid of the ball in time, throws up a wild shot. Then you're compounding these two issues. So I think I'm watching Tyreke Evans as closely as anybody on this team, because when he's played like he has in this last 12, he's absolutely a weapon. And I don't have the stat in front of me right now. I wish I did. But at one point in the season, like his top 10 scoring games in terms of points, the Pacers were 10-0 in. And then they were something like 3 and 8 in the games where he had scored less than X number of points, which there's no coincidence there. I think he gives this team a boost when he's playing well, and it's been an inconsistent start to the season for him, but you're starting to see more consistency here over the last month's time, and you hope that that's a positive indication from that knee operation that he had, that knee treatment that he had, and you hope that's the difference, that's why he's playing better.
Yeah, and we're going to move on to kind of Victor Oladipo. He had a knee injury, sat out 11 basically 12, like you mentioned. He hasn't been shooting it the best as of late, but he's still Victor Oladipo. He can still make clutch shots. We've seen that time and time again. What are kind of you making of his recent struggles, and what do you think he can do to maybe get out of the shooting slump that he's found himself in?
Yeah, so when he came back off those 11 games or 12, whatever you want to call them, he came back to a team that was actually playing really well. And so when he came back, he said, look, I don't want to disrupt what's going on, because what's going on right now is very positive. So he was a little bit more passive than I think he's accustomed to, and his shooting numbers were pretty good during that stretch, but he wasn't putting up the gaudy point totals that you were used to seeing last year, but the team was winning. They went 12-3 in December, and that was really the stretch in which he came back early in December, and so, everything was great. There were no issues, and he continued to play that way. As they got into January and they got off track just a little bit on that road trip, although they went 3-2 in it, the two road games, were blowouts in Boston and Toronto, and then they had the loss to Philadelphia, which they lost by double digits as well. I think he started to realize, okay, this team needs me to be a little bit more like last year's guy. And the great thing about Victor is he's not a selfish player. He's not the kind of guy that says, I need to get 25 points and then we'll figure out how to win. That's not who he is, and it never is who he's going to be. And he's never going to be the type like a James Harden who puts up those gaudy numbers, because he's never going to take that many shots. And that's no diss to James Harden, who's one of the very top talents that we have in this league. That said, I think he started to realize he needs to be a little bit more aggressive, but the balance there, too, is aggressive doesn't necessarily mean putting up a lot more shots. It just means, driving to the lane more, creating other opportunities for others more. When he gets that pass on the perimeter, maybe making the play himself versus giving it off to somebody else. And that's the balance he's working on. And ultimately, you hope that his shot comes around, because when that three-point shot, that perimeter shot is going, he is so quick off the dribble that he can pretty regularly beat his man and cause trouble in the post. I think that's what he's dealing with right now. I think he's in the midst of a shooting slump, which everybody goes through, and then also kind of a transition phase here where he's trying to figure out the correct balance that he wants to play with that is best for the team. But the stats are pretty obvious. When Victor plays within himself in terms of not overloading with shots, the Pacers are a fantastic team when he takes 15 shots or less. And that's no diss at Oladipo. In fact, I think it's a compliment. It's saying, look, this team is at its best when you're doing everything well, assisting, rebounding, shooting, and not just trying to be that high-level scorer. And so I think that comes into it as well. And I think it's just trying to find for him, how much does he want to try to put the team on his shoulders, and how much does he realize he's got four really good players around him, he's got one of the better benches in the NBA, and he doesn't need to do it all either.
Yeah, we know he'll get it figured out. He's perennial all-star, and like I said, just a clutch player all the way around. Kind of want to shift our focus to when the Pacers have kind of played the upper echelon teams. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but we've seen the Pacers kind of struggle against the top teams. Talk about Philly, Boston, Toronto, those teams, which the Pacers will actually face tomorrow night. So the Pacers, they've beaten Boston once and they've beaten Philly once, but besides that, they really kind of struggled a little bit against the upper echelon. I know I've seen Charles Barkley on TNT say this is why the Pacers can't contend, and blah, 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 and just stuff that spews out of his mouth. But what do you think the Pacers need to do better in order to contend with teams like Toronto, Philly, and Boston, and eventually, since if they want to make a deep playoff run, they'll see these teams in the playoffs?
Yeah, I actually have a lot of thoughts on this, and if you follow me on Twitter, you've seen I've had some discussion with some people on this. I think this is, honestly, in my opinion, I think it's really over-exaggerated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that they can't do better and not they shouldn't do better, because I think they can, and I think they should be able to play. You know, you hate to see stretches where you play Toronto, Boston, and then Philadelphia, and you lose all three, and you never really give yourself a chance in any of those three. But here's why I think it's overstated. First and foremost, if you seed the NBA, if you rank the NBA by overall record, in the Eastern Conference, the top 5 teams in this order are Milwaukee, Toronto, Indiana, Philadelphia, Boston. If you then rank those teams in the Eastern Conference, the entire Eastern Conference, by their record against teams over 500, the order goes like this: Milwaukee, Toronto, Indiana, Philadelphia, Boston. It's the exact same. Philadelphia has struggled against teams over 500. Boston has struggled against teams over 500. And so if you were to say, I mean, to me, it would be unreasonable to say the Pacers should be much better than 31-15. There's 16 games over 500 at the 46 game mark. And so, okay, maybe you could have a couple more wins against the top teams in the NBA, but then to do that, you have to drop a couple of games against teams that you feel like you shouldn't drop. And on one hand, yes, good teams beat good teams, but on the other hand, good teams regularly take care of business against the bottom teams in the NBA, and almost no one has done that better than the Pacers. And so, you know, Indiana has beaten Milwaukee. It's beaten Philadelphia. They've beaten Boston. And they led by 17 points in Toronto. Very, very disappointing to lose that 17-point lead. But it shows that they're plenty capable of playing with Toronto as well. And they've beaten all those other teams. And I actually asked Darren Collison about this today, because I kind of had a theory, but I wasn't sure what the players thought about it. And I'll continue asking more players. I said, you know, let's say you face Toronto in the playoffs. Does the regular season record against Toronto, in your opinion, have any bearing on how that playoff series goes? And he said no. He goes, you know, maybe you can use it from a confidence standpoint a little bit, but he goes, when it's game one of the playoffs, nobody is thinking, nobody's looking back to, did you go 2-1 against this team? Did you go 0-3 against this team? Did you go 1-3 against these teams? He said, you're so focused on that game that none of that really matters. So, long-winded way of saying they're 3-6 against the top teams in the East, and they have about a 500 record against teams that are 500 or better. So that can get better, yes, but I really don't think you could ask any better of this team than 31-15 right now. I think they're really achieving at a really high level. And do you want to win against Toronto? Absolutely. But I thought Nate had a pretty good answer to the question, is the Toronto game a statement game? And he said, well, let me ask you, if we beat Toronto, what statement does that make? And the person that asked it was kind of silent. They weren't really sure. And that's true. It's January of an NBA season that's going to go through the middle of April. We still have almost 3 months left in it. We still have almost 40 games left in it. What happened against Philadelphia? If Indiana beats Toronto by 20, great. You move on and you have Memphis on Saturday. If you lose to Toronto by 20, really frustrating. You want to play better. You don't like this recent trend. But I'm not sure that that game has any bearing at all on a potential playoff series against Toronto in April or in May, other than the fact that, you know, you want to beat these top teams because you can move up in the standings when you do, and you can get tiebreaker if you win the season series. So don't misinterpret what I'm saying as saying this game against Toronto. This game against Toronto is absolutely more important than the game against Dallas on Saturday against a team in the Western Conference who's not going to make it. That said, they win big, they lose big. To me, I'm not reacting significantly in either direction.
Yeah, I want to talk about the trade deadline just a little bit.
Sure.
Last year, the Pacers, they stayed pat, which in both of our opinions, we had a show about it, thought it was the right move. This year, there seems to be a tad bit more speculation that the Pacers may make a move. I've heard names like Darren Collison or Corey Joseph, since they're both in the last year of their deal, also because we have Aaron Holiday on the bench, kind of mentioned as trade pieces. Kind of a two-part question. Do you see the Pacers making a move ultimately? And if you do, who would that player or players be?
Well, first and foremost, as we get around trade deadline, we get asked this question a ton. And I will say that any opinion that I have in this regard is simply the opinion of somebody that watches this team as much as anybody does, on the planet. But I am not a decision maker. I have no idea what Kevin Pritchard's thinking. I have no idea what Chad Buchanan, Peter Dinwiddie, Larry Bird, Nate McMillan down the line are thinking in this regard. I thought that there maybe was a decent chance that something could happen when Tyreek Evans was really struggling, because I thought there's an opportunity there. You thought you maybe were getting this guy that would put up X points per game, and he's only putting up X points per game. Y points per game actually would be the correct way to phrase that. And so maybe we need to go find somebody that indeed can give us X points per game that we thought we were getting in the offseason. But Evans has played a lot better lately, and I think that if that continues, I think it significantly lessens their chances. I think if there is a move that Kevin Pritchard feels will genuinely give this team a chance to be better this season and will not affect the long term, I don't think he's afraid of doing it. But when you go down the line, I'm not totally sure where that move comes. Look, Aaron Holiday, I think everybody here likes. But are you really ready to give Aaron Holiday here at about game 50 full control of one of the 2 point guard spots? That would be asking a lot of a rookie. It would be putting a lot of risk into a team that right now has 2 very risk-averse point guards. Darren Collison is really solid. He doesn't turn the ball over. You know what you're getting each night out of him. And Corey Joseph is one of the top defensive point guards in the NBA, and he's as solid as they come right now. If they were to move one of those 2 guys, yeah, maybe they could get better value for them than if they were to lose one of those 2 guys in the offseason, if they couldn't sign both of them. So I understand where that thought is coming from. If it's coming from people, from the outside of, hey, maybe the Pacers can't bring both of these guys back in the offseason. They need to try to get something for them now. But you do that, in my opinion, you take a step back at the point guard position. Let's just say, they trade Darren Collison for a first-round pick. Okay, well, you lose a guy who's a great shooter, who's a good teammate, who's a good assister, who doesn't turn the ball over, who's a good leader, for somebody that's not going to help you down this stretch. So I just really can't see that happening. And then you start to look at other positions. Boyan has been fantastic. Thad provides so many things. Thad, by the way, has maybe been the best pacer in January, but provides so many important things that I don't think you're ready to even think about moving him somewhere. And, maybe there's a big term decision that has to be made on Miles Turner and Domantas Sabonis, and whether they can afford to pay them both big money and have them both on the same team. I don't know. Personally, I really hope that there's a way to keep these guys together, because I think they are such a good yin and yang, and they feed off each other so well. But ultimately, even if that decision does have to be made, I'm not sure you want to make it right now. That's maybe a decision that has to come a year or 2 down the road, but you don't want to lose either of these guys right now unless you could get something, just remarkable for them. And so that's where I really look, and unless there is, hopefully here, knock on wood, not an injury, I'm not sure where that's coming. And I'm not, and I know a lot of people say, if you stay put at the deadline, it means the team stayed content. But there's also a risk of bringing guys in this late, too. Guys that aren't used to this system. They could negatively influence the locker room if they're not a high-character guy, if they don't fit into the system well. There's a risk that you get worse at the deadline, too, when you make a move, even if you're trying to get better. And I know Pacers Twitter out there, everybody from every team ever wants to make this big blockbuster move at the deal because it's a fun and exciting time of the year. And there's no doubt in my mind that if Kevin Pritchard, Chad Buchanan, Peter Dinwiddie down the line see a move that they feel like not only helps them this year but helps them long term, there's no doubt that they would give strong consideration to that. I fully believe that. But when I look at the roster, at least from this semi-uneducated perspective, I'm not really sure where that's coming or who you're really comfortable getting rid of. And if you were to trade said person, what you could get back from said person that would really make a difference. So I have no idea. When we get around this trade deadline time and we actually hit the deadline and that deadline comes at 3 o'clock or whatever, all of us are sitting around our computers waiting for the Woj and the Shams. It's just like everybody else. We have absolutely no idea. But I think that the odds that something like last year happens are probably greater than a significant move coming down the line. But we will all see. Like I said, this is a time where we're all kind of along for the ride.
Yeah. I know I put, especially around the trade deadline, I turn my Twitter notifications on for Woj and Shams, and just because they do great work, and I'm just curious to see what all kind of moves are going to be made. But I kind of agree with you. I don't really think there should be a move, because just if you put Aaron Holiday in, the team's fighting for home court in the playoffs right now. He had a spark in the pan and everything, but I wouldn't feel 100% confident like I do with Corey Joseph and Darren Collins and everyone like that. But I want to get your thoughts. I know we were touching on players earlier, but we know Aaron Holiday is on this roster, but let's touch on the other rookie that the Pacers drafted, Alize Johnson. I know you've probably been keeping up with Mad Ants and everything, and I've just been keeping up with his numbers that he is putting up in Fort Wayne, and I continue to be blown away by. I understand it's the G League. I understand it's not the high level of play that it is in the NBA, but he's in 18 games, he's putting up 19 points, shooting 42% from three, grabbing almost 14 boards. I really like this pick, and wanted to get your thoughts on how he's played so far in the G League and what potential you could maybe see him having with the Pacers in the future.
His numbers are pretty remarkable, and I'm struggling to think he's at about 20 points and 14 rebounds per game. Consider this guy's like 6'7", 6'8", so he's not some monster 7-footer around the rim pulling down every rebound. His ability, it was so funny. Kevin Pritchard said when they drafted him that he's not sure he's seen anybody with a motor like his in the last decade, and you're kind of going, really, a second-round draft pick? And then you go, okay, well, clearly Kevin Pritchard knows what he's talking about. This guy's he's been unbelievable on the glass, just what he does for his position, his ability to score too. I have to be careful saying this because the Pacers have had some good second-round draft picks like Lance Stevenson, but it's tough for me to remember a second-round pick that I'm intrigued about as much as him. And I think Edmund Sumner fits into this category too.
Yep.
But for me, I really would love to see him get an opportunity, and I don't think that's coming this year, barring, again, knock on wood, an injury. But he's actually been up with the big club, and we just saw him in practice a couple of hours ago. I mean, he's a really impressive-looking kid. I'm not sure he's ever going to be the huge time scorer or anything like that. There's a reason he was a second-round draft pick. But I can't wait to see him either. He's really long. He's really athletic. He has the potential to be a really good defender and a really good rebounder. And if he can hit the three-point shot, you have those three things. You have absolute value to a team in the NBA. And for me, I love seeing him practice with these top players, and I love seeing him go at it against the Victor Oladipos, the Boyan Bogdanoviches in practice. But ultimately, I love seeing him with Fort Wayne, and I think that's one of the big benefits of having the Mad Ants under Pacers Sports and Entertainment ownership. They can send him down, and he can work on the exact offense, the exact defense the Pacers are going to run. Steve Gansey, Brian Levy, those two guys, the coach and the GM down there, do a fantastic job of emulating those things and interworking those players in during the year. When they come up, they come down. I want to see him keep going up and getting game reps and getting live opportunity against players in the G League, because while it's not the NBA level of competition yet, all those guys are still pros. Everybody up there is a good player, and I'm really intrigued to see what he has. Rarely, I think by a rule, if you go and look at the second round draft of just about any draft class, you're looking at maybe 3 or 4 guys that make a difference, and maybe like every other year you have a really good player come from the second round, but it's far more often than not guys that don't ever make an NBA floor or don't end up, regularly contributing. I think this guy really has a chance, and I'm really excited to see how he develops in the next year. Plus, I think that's true of Edmund Sumner too. He has, parts of his game that are really intriguing also. But I'm on board the Alize Johnson trade, which I'm really excited to see what he turns into.
Yeah, we're gonna touch on just a few games. I know we have to get you out of here because I know you're a very busy man here soon. But just over our Christmas break, the Pacers played in honestly one of the most amazing NBA games I've seen in recent memory. The overtime win against the Bulls, a lot closer than most Pacer fans probably wanted it, but it was just as us being Pacers fans, we wanted the Pacers to win, but me as an NBA fan, it was just really exciting to watch. Obviously the ending, but the back and forth between Zach LaVine and Victor Oladipo, and then Lauri Markkanen chipping in there. Just, you witnessed the game in person and everything, so what was your reaction to overtime and just the late game chaos that was the end of that game?
That's really the best example I can think of when I try to reiterate this point, just how good the players in the NBA are. And even when you play a team that has a bad record, I think this is true of the NBA more than any other professional sports league. You're still playing against some extremely high-level competition that has the ability to beat you on any given night. Look, every single professional league, the NFL, the NHL, MLB, has talented guys throughout its entire league. But, like, can a quarterback who is a third-string quarterback really go out and beat a good team on any given day? Rarely do you see that happen. There are so many good players in this league, players that are capable of putting up big numbers, and we see it. I remember my first year here, we brought in A.J. Price, who wasn't even playing in the NBA, and he came in and had like a 30-point game, like 2 or 3 games in. The Pacers had so many injuries, they were able to get a injury exemption and add a player to the roster, and he had like a 30-point game, like 2 or 3 games in to being here. This league has so much talent that it was an unbelievable game. It was a fantastic game to watch back and forth. It was remarkable, and what really, my overriding takeaway, personally, I would have liked to see a foul on that last 3 that LaVine threw in of regulation, but ultimately the Pacers defended those possessions just fine. It wasn't like they were, getting caught off of screens and Chicago was getting good looks. Sometimes in this league, good players hit good shots, and that was the case on both ends down the stretch, and I'd have to go back and look to try to remember. I think Chicago hit like 3 or 4 threes in the final minute of regulation, and then the Pacers hit like 3, and Chicago hit 1, and then had the one that didn't count in overtime. But it's a good example of you never know what you're going to get on any given night in this league. You might see it as Pacers at a team that is, aiming for Zion Williamson in the draft. And then all of a sudden, you've got this fantastic game on their hands because ultimately, guess what? Zach LaVine couldn't care less about Zion Williamson. He's playing for his team on the floor. He's playing for his future career in the NBA. And so are all of those guys on the floor. And the difference between a tanking team and just a bad team is that a tanking team is typically done by ownership, where they will take all of their best players off the floor and they'll sit them and they'll rest them and the alike. A team like Chicago is not a good team, but they've got players that are more than capable of putting up big nights on any given night and more than capable of doing stuff like that. And I left so impressed with some of those young Bulls players. And ultimately, from a Pacers perspective, it was a little bit more dicey than you would have liked. But you got out of there with the win. And being a good team and finishing with a good record, oftentimes the difference between a 46-47 win team and a 52-53 win team is, did you figure out how to win games like that? On the road against a team you should beat, who plays up to their level of competition, who gives you a really tough run. Do you falter in those last moments, or do you find a way to pull out a quote-unquote ugly win? And I think that's one thing this Pacers team has done. There have been a handful of ugly wins, but ugly wins are a lot better, than losses, pretty losses if those exist. So another good example of the Pacers being able to get one out. They did that the last time they were in Chicago, too. Darren Collison had to hit a shot late in the game. Miles Turner got a block. The Pacers trailed by double digits in both of those games, but they found ways to win, which is ultimately the most important thing. Yeah,
we'll get you out of here on these final 2 questions that I had. Shift our focus to, I know I'm looking so far ahead, but we've talked about it a little bit on our show. The Pacers play in the month of March. They have what I would consider, and I'm pretty sure most Pacer fans would consider the most brutal kind of stretch of the year. They go at Milwaukee, at Philadelphia, then they play the Knicks. home against the Thunder, at Denver, at Portland, at LA, at Golden State. They get Denver again at home. Then they go at Oklahoma City and at Boston. That's pretty brutal stretch. And we kind of talked about performing against these top teams in the league. That stretch will test the Pacers mightily, in my opinion. Wanted to get your thoughts on kind of that brutal kind of schedule and what the Pacers can maybe do to kind of... I know it's a long ways away, and maybe injuries can play a part here and there. Hopefully not for the Pacers, but just what the Pacers can maybe do to make that schedule a bit easier and play up to that competition.
Well, every team goes through something like this. And as you have referenced, this is the toughest part of the Pacers schedule. I was actually... Funny you mentioned it, just looking at that stretch about an hour and a half ago. And this is why, look, I think it's important that you bank as many wins as you can right now, because you're going to hit that stretch where you might go 3-5 over 8 games. 3-5 might be an okay result over 8 games, in fact. And you mentioned all of those teams. When you have those stretches against teams where you don't have any, you don't want to say gimme games, but against teams that are near the bottom of the NBA, it becomes tougher because you have to be on your game every single night. Philadelphia is going through that stretch right now. Philadelphia is in Game 3 or Game 4 of playing 12 straight against teams with 500-plus records, and they're doing okay so far. The Pacers actually started out that stretch for them, and they beat Houston the other night. But really, the key to going into any of those games, and it's a little bit cliche and it's also boring, you have to give your utmost focus and attention to each game at a time. And you can't look ahead and say, if you're the team I'm talking, oh my goodness, Golden State's coming up, and then we have OKC, and then we have Boston and all of that. You just have to keep a focus on one at a time. There's one tough game coming up tonight. And that's one thing I think this team does an extremely good job about. Nate McMillan is a little bit boring in a sense from time to time of, he will say, well, what do you think of this stretch? And he'll go, well, our focus is on this team in front of us. Our focus is on growth. And that might not be the most exciting thing to hear, but it really is genuine. That's not him blowing smoke or trying not to say anything controversial. That's really how they take it. They have such a micro focus, and I think that allows them to avoid these big swings of big losing streaks. I mean, the team still has not lost 3 games in a row. It didn't happen at all in 2018, and it hasn't happened here in 2019. I mean, you have to go back to the 2017 calendar year to find a time that the Pacers dropped 3 games in a row, which is remarkable. It's a testament to their resolve, their ability to stay focused in these type of situations, and no moment is too big for them. How's that stretch going to go? It's impossible to say. But the other thing is, you can really help yourself out by banking these wins in this time beforehand and getting your record up to where you want to be, so that way you can take a hit. You can take a 3-5 stretch, something along those lines, and still be just fine. Every team has to go through it. For the Pacers, it'll be in late March. The nice thing, if you look at the the April schedule, that half of the month is very doable. You'll have Detroit, I think, a couple of times in there. There's maybe one tough game, but if I remember right, Detroit's in there a couple times, Brooklyn's in there. It's a really manageable stretch. So if they do struggle in that late March stretch, they've got 5 or 6 games in April where they hopefully can finish strong and get to the point of where they need to be, because really the difference between 3, 4, and 5 in the standings is really significant. If you're the 3 seed, you've got a home playoff series right now, I think, against Miami. If you're the 5 seed, you've got an away playoff series against Philadelphia. I mean, it doesn't get any more different than that. So really the difference between being in the top 3 and in the 4 and the 5 spots, really significant. And obviously you want a home first-round playoff series more than anything. But if you can finish in the top 3, you avoid having to play one of those other top 4 teams around you in that first round, and you give yourself a much better chance to advance into round 2.
Yeah, and we'll get you out of here on this. I know it's kind of hard making predictions since we're only kind of halfway into the year, a little over halfway, but if you were to kind of give an overall prediction on maybe record or seeding right now for the Pacers because this team expects to be in playoffs, they unless a catastrophic miracle happens, won't be in the playoffs, but they will most likely, like I said, be in the playoffs. So what would your overall record or just seeding prediction be come playoff time?
Yeah, I'd have to look at the schedule to give I think they're on pace right now for 55 wins. The schedule's also going to get tougher.
Yeah.
So I'll say in that low to mid 50s range should be the goal. And then ultimately, I think you're aiming for, I think that 3 seed, if they could end up where they are, would be a really good spot. And Philadelphia's going to come charging at the end of the year. Boston's going to come charging. It's going to be tough to hold those teams off, but you never know if you get a drop from Milwaukee or a Toronto either. So I'll say if they can get to the low mid 50s wins range, if they can kind of keep this pace up, that you hope at least that's good enough to get you the 3 seed. And then if you're in that position, you just can't take that first round opponent lightly because you were able to avoid Boston or Philadelphia. But I'm not really big into the prediction business because that's for, I think, what other people kind of do with their line of work. That's not really ours. But that said, I'm pretty confident that this team is going to be able to sustain a pretty high level of play. And I think the fact that they're not reliant on Victor Oladipo to have big games, I think that bodes really well for the future. I think you would much rather that than if they're pulling out these games by a couple points because Victor's putting up 38. Can Victor do that all the time kind of thing? If anything, Victor has more to give, and the Pacers are still winning despite it. So that's a really promising sign for me. And all that starts here Wednesday with Toronto, but then Saturday against Memphis. We'll see what they have for the Raptors, but ultimately, I'm not using that Toronto game as a major barrier or something more positive if they are able to win it. I think it's an important game here coming up on Wednesday. It's one that you'd really like to get. It's an 82-game season, though, and the result of that game is not going to forecast, in my opinion, how the Pacers do the rest of the way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pat. We greatly appreciate having you on. Like I said, Noah's kind of a struggle to work out the times, but it's glad we could finally work something out to get you on the show. We greatly appreciate it.
Hey, no problem, guys. I appreciate you having me on and being flexible with my schedule, and best of luck as your I think I heard right the college careers are winding down.
Yes, sir.
Last few days until you have to be a real person. But enjoy it for sure.
All right, will do. Thank you so much, sir. Have a great day.
Take care.
Well, that was a phenomenal interview. Glad we were able to. I've been contacting him all back last semester. But unfortunately, we weren't able to get him on. But finally able to get him on. Dylan, you can finally talk now, I guess.
I was just content with letting him speak. He's more educated and more well versed than I am.
More than both of us combined. But just anything on what he had to say. And
I liked all of his points. I think he comes from a standpoint where he can make more educated decisions and comments about what the Pacers are going to do. I liked everything he said. I agree with the trade deadline. I think the Pacers should stay pat.
Yeah, me too.
There's no reason to Evan Turner it like the 2013 season. So I think for right now, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think that stands well with the Pacers right now. And I agree with where he thinks we should be. I think the 3 seed is a good spot. I absolutely do not want to see Philadelphia or Boston in the playoffs. I think that would just be a recipe for another LeBron-esque exit in the first round. But other than that, I agree. I think I liked what he said about Turner and Sabonis. I think they both they have their own time on the floor, and which is what I've been saying. Yeah,
I was about to say I was gonna. I didn't want to interrupt him or anything, but I know when we brought that up last semester when we were talking about when I put the poll up, or when Pacers Twitter was going in a frenzy when Miles Turner was having a down stretch of games. But you gotta roll with whatever's working for you. And Nate McMillan,
stay with him.
Yeah, and Nate McMillan's doing a phenomenal job. I think he's one of the most underrated coaches in basketball. Doesn't get talked about enough, but you know what? That's where the Pacers want to be.
Yeah.
Do we want to recap anything, or we
could preview the Toronto and Memphis game if you want, and then we can just that'll be the only 2 games we talk about.
That's perfectly fine with me. So, like we were talking about with Pat, the Pacers have a really like he said, don't buy too much stock into just one game, but the Pacers do have their hands full with the Toronto Raptors tomorrow night. the last time these two teams met was quite interesting because, the Pacers had a 17-point lead. Unfortunately, blew it. The refs didn't call the foul on, I think it was OG Anunoby that fouled Boyan. That Boyan could have went to the line and tied it if he hit all 3 free throws. Never know if it would have happened, but that was just part of the last 2-minute report that the ref said, "Oh yeah, we met."
The 2-minute report.
Oh yeah,
I wish they just wouldn't say anything.
Yeah, and just like kind of the NFL with the pass interference call in the Saints game.
Hey, did you see they're protesting and they want to bring both teams back to play out the last 2 minutes of that game?
And Roger Goodell has that power, but it's highly doubtful. But just the refs kind of messed up in that one. But Pacers got to move on from that one and just look forward to this one. Gonna be another difficult. Granted, this is at home. I believe it's at home, correct?
Yeah, it's at home.
Okay, so I don't know.
I want to say it's a win because I think we've had a good break. Granted, so has Toronto. They haven't played since Saturday when they beat Memphis, oddly enough. But I think so. This game, rest is not going to be any kind of factor in any of this. It's just about who's going to be performing at the best. I think this is the game that I think Oladipo realizes, hey, maybe I got to step up a little bit more during these to the Torontos, the Milwaukees. So I think this is where he kind of makes his statement or reappearance into the scene. At least I hope that's what he does. So I'm going to say a win. I think we've just been playing better basketball since the Philadelphia game. And I think we take this a win, but I could see it going either way. It just depends on who plays and who's shooting well or not.
I'm looking at the injury report, and it says Kawhi and OG are both out. Kawhi was updated today.
I know Kawhi has been battling something.
Yeah,
me sure
too.
What.
But we'll definitely keep an eye on that. If Kawhi doesn't play, granted, I don't think he played.
He didn't play against the game.
Yeah, no, 17-point.
Because that was Kyle Lowry's first game back, I believe.
So if Kawhi doesn't play, I could see the Pacers pulling one out.
It says OG Anunoby's on track to return Wednesday against the Pacers via the Toronto Sun. So.
Yeah.
And then Kawhi was out via rest for Tuesday's game against Sacramento. So that was a while. That was last week. So.
Can you rest him again, Toronto?
Yeah.
I mean, but we'll see how that goes. I mean, of course he's out for rest.
I think Toronto does play a game tonight.
If
that does, then that's their back-to-back. Because if they said Tuesday,
yes, they play
Sacramento tonight. That's what I did.
So that'll be a back-to-back for Toronto.
And that's cross country too. They have to fly from Sacramento all the way to Indy.
Is it in Toronto or is it?
It's in Toronto. Oh, sure. I'm sorry.
Geography.
I see Sacramento and I get excited that they had to go a cross country flight, which would really suck. But
geography's not our majors, so don't hold us to it. But they do play back to back. So you know what? I'll say the Pacers squeak out a win. Back to backs are not always easy. The Pacers have seemed to do fairly well in back to backs, but who knows? But who knows what if they're going to rest Kawhi again tonight, or
I imagine they won't rest him back to back. I feel like this isn't an NBA rule, like you can't rest back to back or whatever. But.
Yeah, who knows? But so I'm gonna still say Pacers squeak out a win. Definitely be a very close game.
I agree.
So if Kawhi's playing, obviously gotta stop. Kyle Lowry's averaging 9.5 assists. Good lord.
Yeah.
Did not know that. But anyway, think they pull out a close win here, and then they play, as Pat mentioned, they play Memphis on Saturday.
Yep, at Memphis.
At Memphis, this should be an easy win, I would like to think. Have we played Memphis earlier?
Yeah, we did. We played them first game of the season.
Oh, was it the first
111-83 win.
Okay, so this will be our last meeting of Memphis. Granted, we haven't seen them since the very beginning of the year, when Memphis looked like they were maybe going to contend, but that's taken a hard south, just like their standing or place in the rankings. So, I think this should be another easy win.
They're on a 6-game losing streak.
Let's not be the team to stop that.
Granted, the teams they've been playing are Heat, Rockets, Bucks, Celtics, Raptors, and Pelicans.
Okay, those are and doesn't get any easier with.
They play the Hornets tomorrow night.
Okay, so I mean, Hornets. Granted, we took care of business against the Hornets, but I feel bad for Kemba Walker. I really do. I was gonna ask maybe Pat about the Kemba Walker thing because I know you.
Yeah, I hate Kemba.
I love Kemba.
I mean, I love him as a player. I hate him as an ideal fit.
Oh yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
You want to actually watch how to do a step back? Watch Kemba Walker. Don't watch James Harden.
Also, Memphis will be on a back-to-back. They also play Sacramento on Friday and then Indiana on Saturday. So both home games. So
I'll still say a win. There's no reason why they can't pull that one off on Saturday. Then
hopefully they don't overlook their next opponent.
Can't overlook Memphis. Obviously, you got to deal with Marc Gasol. Jaren Jackson's a solid rookie. Having a solid. Obviously, Mike Conley's still there. I don't know if Chandler Parsons is.
Chandler Parsons is gone.
Is he?
Yep.
Oh.
I think or at least he's not playing with them anymore.
Last time I knew Chandler Parsons was playing with Memphis, but I don't know.
It was like an amicable leaving or something.
Whatever, but still got players to deal with, obviously, but I think the Pacers will take care of business. Hopefully go 2-0 this week, but definitely 1-1. I'd definitely see that. Yeah, we hope 1-1. We don't hope 0-2. Then after that, we start to we'll see Golden State, grind. But we're not gonna talk about that one. We want to have a show on Sunday? I mean,
yeah, we'll go back to regular schedule.
Go back to. Yeah, the only reason we had this special show, obviously, because Pat was on, and he's like, hey, can you make it during the weekend? And we're like, yeah, we can see about it. And we finally were able to get him on. Like I said, so much fun to have him on, so much fun to get a professional like him and his voice, obviously, his insight with the Pacers and with the team.
We can only see so much that happens on TV.
So, great to have a guy like Pat on. Maybe I'm still looking at trying to get Kristen Airy. No promises or anything, but I will try and work my magic, the little magic that I have. But we'll see about that. But we will keep you updated on everything Pacers news. Ian continues to live tweet for us. Thank
Except
you,
for the
Ian.
fourth quarter, but
Hey, I mean, if the game, if it's a blowout or if it's, I understand if it's a blowout or anything. I mean,
I usually just go back and just retweet the Pacers' final score.
Hey, I mean, it's whatever. He's in the process. I actually met him the other day when
he was for colleges.
He's in his college search, and
remember when I was a wee lad.
But we're not going to talk about those days. Yeah. I probably don't want to know about those days.
I don't want to drudge up old dirt anymore.
But that's where we're going to leave things. Like Dylan said, we're going to be back with our regular Sunday episodes this Sunday, and we're going to probably recap Toronto and Memphis, then preview Golden State. So and
hopefully Clay doesn't go 8 for 8 against us or whatever he did against Los Angeles.
We'll actually have to worry about DeMarcus Cousins. But we'll leave that till Sunday. So once again, thank you so much for Pat Boylan joining. We're gonna tag him on Twitter and everything, and just go follow Pat Boylan if you're not already. If you're a Pacers fan, I'm pretty sure you are. But yeah, it was a fun episode. But until Sunday, go Pacers.